You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Shalom, this is Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and I want to welcome you to this week's edition of SLA Insights. I'm continuing a discussion that started a couple months ago on increasing comprehensible input, and specifically, most recently, talking about how to increase the quality of comprehensible input. So for the last few episodes, I've been working through the guidelines for how to create structured input activities, which are activities that are designed to manipulate the comprehensible input in such a way to derive, so the students can derive more intake from the input that they are receiving. So far, I've covered the first five, and I'll just quickly review those. Present one thing at a time. This is the first one. 2, keep meaning in focus. 3, move from sentences to connected discourse. 4, use both oral and written input. 5, the learners must do something with the input. And now today, I'm going to present the 6th guideline and the final one. And it's really the 6th guideline that makes structured input activities different from many other activities. The first 5 guidelines that I presented really could be applied to a lot of activities and be used well to create good input-based activities. But this last one, number 6, is keeping the learner's processing strategies in mind. And it's this guideline that differentiates structured input from other types of input. Now, this is based on the principles of input processing, which I covered a few episodes ago, episodes 27 and 28, if you need to go back and review those. These are the natural or default strategies that learners use when processing language input. And they're not always the most efficient, and so don't promote language acquisition in the best way. So just by quick review, again, go back to 27 and 28 for a full review, but by quick review, these principles there are two main principles with some corollaries. The first main principle is the primacy of meaning principle, in that learners will process input for meaning before they process it for form. In other words, they're going to look for vocabulary content words before they look for grammatical structure. And so there are various things, including the fact that students will quickly use up their working memory or their attentional resources if you try to put too much into the activity, and they're not going to use their attentional resources to process grammatical form if they can easily access it through a vocabulary item. So that's the first principle. The second main principle is the first noun principle, and that says that learners tend to process the first noun or pronoun they encounter in the sentence as the subject or agent. And there are a few exceptions to that rule in the corollaries, but that's the main idea. So what we want to do in this 6th step or 6th guideline for creating structured input is that you need to keep these strategies in mind. And here's the deal. Sometimes you're going to work with those default strategies to help the students learn best, and sometimes you're going to work against them to help them learn best. So, for example, if you're going to work with the strategies, you want students, for example, students process words in sentence initial position before middle or final. That's one of the corollaries. And so if you want them to get the best chance at processing that new form that you're giving them, you're going to place that target structure in sentence initial position whenever possible. So that's one example. Another example of working with the strategies is one of the corollaries is students process content words before grammatical forms. So to force them to focus on the grammatical form, what you do is you remove any content words that might give away the verb, so the target form. So for example, if you're using a verb is your target structure, and say it's a past tense masculine singular form, then you want to remove any content words from that sentence that would clue them into what the form of that verb is. So you might remove any adverbs that talk about time, yesterday or last week, to tell them, oh, it's past tense. You would also want to remove, if possible, the subject, because if there's a subject present, that might give away, oh, this is third masculine singular or whatever. And so if you remove those items from the sentence, they're forced to focus on the verb. They're forced to process the form of that verb and to internalize it and hopefully acquire it in the end. So those are a couple examples of working with the strategies to help the students. You might also work against the strategies. So for example, the students process the first noun they encounter as the subject. So what you want to do is to start by explicitly telling the students, this is what your natural processing strategy is. Don't do it. And then give them activities in which the first noun is not the subject, and train them to rethink or override their natural defaults. And so they start learning to look for something and be expecting the first noun may not be the subject, and learn to look further into the sentence to find the subject. So those are the theoretically how you might go about keeping the processing strategies in mind as you design input activities, structured input activities. Now, I've also created a few examples that I'm going to pull up here on a PDF. And for these, I have 3 samples for you to look at that demonstrate how to keep processing strategies in mind. And one of my favorite ways to do that is through photos. And this first example gives you a photo of 3 people acting out a particular set of actions. You can see that the man on the left, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're just listening, I'll try to describe it here. There's a man on the left who is clearly in the process of talking, and 2 women on the right who are standing silently listening. And then below that, I have 4 possible answers, and then just the instructions say, choose the word that best describes the photo. This is a Hebrew example. The first option in the multiple choice is Shama, he listened. The second one is Amar, he spoke. The third one is Yashav, he sat. And the fourth one is Amru, they spoke. And so it's asking them to match which of those words best describes the picture. Now, one of the things you have to be careful of when you're doing photo matching is that you avoid a couple pitfalls. One is ambiguous photos. It has to be really clear, if you're using photos for this type of activity, really clear who's doing what. A second pitfall that you have to be careful of are the distractors. Make sure the distractors, that is the incorrect answers, are not giving away the answer. So this might happen where the correct answer is the only correct vocabulary item. So if there's only one Amar, for example, and the rest are all different verbs, then the student will not be processing the form of the verb. They'll just be using vocabulary to figure it out. And so you'll notice in this example, I have two cases of Amar, and of course the correct is the second one, Amar, he spoke. But there's also Amru, they spoke, and so they have to process which of those is correct. The other possibility, the other pitfall that you can fall into with distractors is that the correct answer is the only correct grammatical form. So in this example, it's he spoke, third masculine singular. And so you could possibly have a bunch of other verbs or the same root, but all different grammatical forms. And so you want to be able to have distractors that don't give away the right answer, in short, is what I'm trying to say. Now, I want to point out to you in this photo matching activity how this helps the students overcome their natural default processing. First of all, there are no extra words in the sentence. There is only one word in each sentence for the possibilities. And so we're not overloading working memory. There is no um, subject that's going to give away, oh, this is a third masculine singular. We don't have any content words that are indicating, oh, this is a past tense or that kind of a thing. And also, because it's a one-word sentence, the word is in sentence initial position, which is the preferred place, although you could also argue it's middle and final as well. And so these are some ways in which this is helping the student overcome their natural processing strategies, working with them, in this case, to really help them focus just on the word, to process that form, and to connect it with meaning. And notice, too, it fulfills most of the other requirements for structured input as well. We're keeping meaning in focus, we're presenting one thing at a time, and so on. Okay? Now, I'm also going to pull up another example, and this is the example from last week, the who did it example. And we worked through it looking at last week how it fulfilled the first 5 criteria, the first 5 guidelines for creating structured input. Today, I want to look at how it fulfills the 6th guideline of working with the processing strategies, keeping those processing strategies in mind. Now, these sentences have a little bit more to them in that usually there is an object of some sort coming with the verb. But notice again, there is no explicitly stated subject, which means that is not going to give away what the verb is in terms of person, gender, number. It's also they do not contain any time reference, so it's not going to give away the tense or mood of the verb. And so for the first example is Ahmad Bavet Lechem. So who did this? You have to be able to work with the form of the verb to decide who did it. And in this case, it's David, the masculine singular, third masculine singular would be the correct one. Notice also that the verb is in sentence initial position because we've left out the subject. And so that's the first thing they're going to encounter. It's the first thing they're going to start thinking about. It's the first thing they're going to process. And so again, this is working with their processing strategies, their default processing strategies to help them get the most intake they can out of these exercises. All right. And then one more example here. And this is what's called an affective activity, and that there's not any already presumed right or wrong answer. It depends on the student's personality, preferences, activities, experiences. And so the instructions say, indicate which of the following activities you did yesterday. And so it's going to vary student by student. There's not a given right or wrong answer to these, but it still gets them thinking about the meaning. It's keeping meaning in focus. Notice again that the verb is in sentence initial position, so it's giving them the best chance at noticing and processing, and that any other noun in the sentence will be an object. And so they may be tempted with their first noun strategy to think, oh, maybe this noun, even though it's after the verb, maybe this noun is the subject, because that often can happen in Hebrew. And so, for example, the first exercise, halachti el Eretz Canaan. I walked to the land of Canaan. Now, there's a good chance nobody's going to pick that one. But, perhaps at some point in their life, they did visit Israel and they walked at least in Canaan, or Palestine or Israel. So that's possible, but unlikely. The second one, achalti lechem. I ate bread. Now, this one has a noun after it, lechem, and it's the first noun that the students are going to encounter in the sentence. By default, they may choose that as the subject, ignoring the form of the verb, and say, oh, bread ate. Oh, no, that can't be possible. And so based on the corollary to that default processing strategy, they're going to have to rethink it and go back to achalti. Oh, yeah, I ate bread. All right. So let's skip down to the last one. Natati zahav. I gave gold. And for this one, again, the verb is first, giving them the best possibility, best chances at processing it. There's no explicitly stated subject, so they're going to have to process the verb to get the subject. And again, we've got another noun in the sentence that could be, perhaps, identified as the subject incorrectly by the students. And so you would have to process it, you have to understand it to figure out, I gave gold or gave gold. Now, did the gold do the giving, or no, that doesn't make sense. And so it really forces them to focus on the form of the verb to derive meaning from the sentence. And then in that process, hopefully internalizing it and acquiring that form. So these are some examples of structured input activities that keep the meaning in focus and help the students work through their default processing strategies. Again, sometimes working with those strategies, just making use of them, being aware of them, and removing distractors or other things that would give away your target form. Sometimes working against them, forcing them to really rethink the way they process a sentence in the target language. So, just by quick review, we've now finished all 6 guidelines for creating structured input activities. The first one was present one new thing at a time. 2, keep meaning in focus. 3, move from sentences to connected discourse. 4, use both oral and written input. 5, learners must do something with the input. And 6, keep the learner's processing strategies in mind. These 6 guidelines can be further explored if you would like to get Andrew Farley's book on creating structured input activities. And he goes into a lot of detail and some more examples on how you might do this. So these structured input activities then, by way of review, are a way of creating input that is specifically targeted to help the students access and derive more intake from the input they receive, because given our limited working memory, processing abilities are limited. And so we don't want to overload students and have them focus on the wrong thing and not have enough working memory left to actually learn what you want them to learn. So this is helping them focus on that target structure and internalize it and acquire it in the end. So next week, I'm going to do some review, go back over a little bit of processing instruction, what that looks like, and the importance of comprehensible input. So I hope you can join me for next week, and in the meantime, have a great week.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.